Have you ever heard of a fugitive who tried to escape through the vastness of the desert, believing that there he would find freedom, or at least a quick escape from the police? Now imagine a situation where this hope turns into an unexpected nightmare, something that no one could have predicted. In the heart of Arizona, a desperate man decided to cross the vast and arid desert, thinking that there would be his refuge, his perfect hiding place. But what began as an attempt to escape from the authorities eventually became a story of an unusual confrontation with nature, a confrontation that no one could have imagined. Have you ever been in a situation where nature, which is usually seen as something beautiful, turned against you so suddenly? Stay with me until the end, because what comes next will surprise you. The story of this fugitive is marked by a detail that makes all the difference. While trying to hide from watchful eyes, he found an abandoned hut, an empty structure, apparently forgotten by time. But while trying to take refuge there, he stumbled upon a nest of marimbondos hidden under the roof of the building. It is difficult to imagine what goes through someone's head when they realize that they have just fallen into a trap of their own luck, a trap of insects that may seem small, but that have a strength and number capable of turning any hope of escape into a real nightmare. In a matter of seconds, the scene turned into a scene of screams, agony, and despair. The man tried to run away, run into the open desert, believing that the vastness could offer some kind of salvation, but the marimbondos did not give chances. They pursued him relentlessly, an angry swarm that seemed determined to make him their victim. Patrolmen who followed his tracks arrived in time to find the already fallen man, covered in stings without strength, the victim of one of the most bizarre captures ever recorded in the region. The desert, which until then had seemed his refuge, turned against him in a surprising way. And it's that story we're going to explore now. A narrative that blends escape, despair, and the relentless force of nature. You will discover how a simple hideout became the scene of one of the most unusual captures of the year, a story that will surely stay in your memory for a long time. Get ready, because what comes next will trap you from beginning to end, revealing details that will surprise you and make you reflect on the power that nature has to change the outcome of any situation. If you think this story ends here, you are mistaken. The truth is that it reminds us of how unpredictable nature can be, and often puts us in situations that look like something out of a thriller. It is important to reflect on the risks of trying to escape from what we cannot control, and also on the strength of nature itself, which often teaches us to be more humble. If this story struck a chord with you, leave here in the comments what caught your attention the most, or if you have ever been through a similar situation, even if in a different way. Your opinion is essential so that we can continue to bring relevant content that makes you think and get excited. Also, if you liked this video, don't forget to like it, because it helps a lot to spread this story and others like it to more people who are also interested in real and amazing stories. And of course, if you want to continue following this type of content, subscribe to the channel. Thus, you stay on top of everything that happens here, with stories that make us reflect, learn, and why not, move us. Your participation is what makes this channel grow, and it is she who ensures that we can continue to bring incredible stories like this. So here is the invitation. Share, comment, and subscribe. Thus, together, we can further explore the mysteries and surprises that life holds for all of us, always with respect, empathy, and a careful look at the lessons that nature and life itself offer us. It was a scorching day in the Arizona desert, and the heat seemed to embrace everything around with an almost suffocating intensity. The sun shone brightly, reflecting off the hot sand and rocks scattered across the barren ground, creating a light show that seemed to have no end. The landscape was marked by a vastness of golden and brown tones, where the horizon was confused with the clear, almost cloudless sky, as if the sky itself was merging with the earth. In this scenario of extreme isolation, each element seemed to reinforce the feeling of loneliness and of an environment that, at the same time, hid secrets and silent dangers. It was the kind of place that, for those who know its mysteries, offers a harsh but irresistible beauty, a space that seems made to hide or flee depending on the perspective. For those trying to escape the law or any problem they might be facing, the desert presented itself as a kind of refuge. The idea that no one could get there or find anyone hiding was almost an illusion, but at the same time a hope. The vastness seemed like a vast natural labyrinth, where every bend, every mound of sand or stone could hide a way out or a trap. The feeling of being completely alone in the middle of it all conveyed a sense of both freedom and vulnerability. The few abandoned buildings that dotted the landscape, for the most part, were wooden or brick structures, forgotten by time, covered with dust and plants that tried to infiltrate between the cracks. These buildings, which seemed to be vestiges of an ancient presence, turned out to be the perfect setting for those looking for a hiding place, even if that hiding place was a trap. The atmosphere of the desert reinforced the idea that there, any decision had a profound impact. Each step was marked by a sense of risk, the possibility of getting lost in the immensity or finding something unexpected. For someone on the run, isolation was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it offered the hope of going unnoticed, of disappearing into the vastness, but on the other, vulnerability increased with each passing hour. The heat, the lack of resources, the difficulty of communication, all contributed to a difficult survival scenario, which required a strong mindset and quick decisions. In this kind of environment, the hidden truth is often not what you see on the surface, but what you feel in the soul. The weight of the choice to flee, the courage to face the unknown, or the naivety of thinking that nature would not turn against someone so vulnerable. And on that day, what seemed like an attempt to escape reality quickly turned into a journey of impact, where the transformation of a simple decision to look for a hiding place ended up revealing a hidden side of the scenario itself. As if the desert was somehow conspiring against the man, his escape, which seemed like a clever strategy, turned into a silent and deadly trap. The arid environment, which almost looked like a living entity, turned out to be more than a simple landscape. She became an active character in the story, a force that tested boundaries, challenged courage, and often showed her true face when she was least expected. In this game of choices and consequences, the hidden truth was revealed in the form of an impact that no one could predict, an impact that would completely change the course of that desperate escape. A man, pursued by the police, believed that he could lose the patrolman crossing the vastness of the desert. His escape was not only a desperate attempt to escape capture, but also a demonstration of how the human mind can be influenced by a mixture of fear, hope, and an often unfounded trust. Exhausted, but still confident that the vastness of the barren territory would give him freedom, he advanced with heavy steps, each more tired than the other, hoping to find a hiding place that would protect him until the dust settled. His strategy seemed simple: the farther, the better. Even as the sun beat down and sweat trickled down his forehead, he insisted that the vastness of the desert would give him the edge he needed to disappear into the landscape. In his mind, every step taken toward an old abandoned cabin was a smart decision, a master move against the system. He believed that by hiding in one of these places forgotten by time, he would be able to gain time, recover from fatigue, and perhaps rearrange his thoughts for a new escape. And as he walked, his mind was filled with illusions of security, a false sense of control over the situation. He thought that there, cut off from the world, no one could find him, that the vastness of the desert was his ally, a kind of natural shield against any attempt to capture. This confidence, although understandable in moments of despair, carried a dose of naivety, for nature, with all its raw beauty, had other plans. Upon spotting the cabin, an aging wooden structure with its doors wide open and partially destroyed roof, he felt a brief relief. By his logic, Ali could hide undetected, go unnoticed, and wait for the dust of the chase to settle. To him, that seemed like a smart tactic, a decision that could guarantee his survival for a while longer. But what he did not imagine was that the real danger was hidden just in that place under the roof, where a nest of marimbondos quietly hid. His attention, focused on the escape, had not realized what was behind that facade, forgotten by time. A small, barely noticeable detail that would soon turn into your worst trap. His entrance into the hut was swift, almost instinctive, as if seeking immediate refuge. However, as he stepped on the wooden floor, a subtle sound alerted him to something wrong, a feeling that he was not completely alone there. At that moment, his attention was completely diverted to the roof, where, looking up, he noticed the deadly hiding place, a nest of marimbondos that, until then, had remained silent. The discovery came with devastating force, for the silence of the place had masked the danger. A small line of marimbondos, hidden under the shingles, had become a silent trap, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when he realized it, the impact was immediate. an explosion of pain and despair that came without warning, like a sentence of condemnation. The moment of decision had arrived. With his heart racing and his body gripped by a sharp pain, he tried to retreat, but it was too late. Insects, attracted by the heat of the body, began to attack him relentlessly, forming an angry cloud that gave no respite. Each sting was a cruel reminder that the escape, which seemed so simple in his head, had turned into his greatest prison. Thus, in that scenario of despair and pain, his false sense of security was completely undone, making it clear that nature, with all its strength, does not forgive even the most well-created illusions. And all this was happening under the scorching desert sun, while the patrolman, attentive, approached, following the tracks of that escape that would become one of the most bizarre and impactful stories of the year. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this story is not only about a frustrated escape, but also about the decisions we make, often based on an illusory hope for control. That man's journey reveals how our mindset can lead us to extreme situations where the impact of a seemingly simple decision can trigger consequences we can't even imagine. There is a hidden truth behind every choice, and often it reveals itself in ways we can't even predict. As a lesson in humility, this narrative shows that the force of nature, combined with our own actions, can turn what seemed to be an escape into a definitive ambush. It is in this game of strategies, illusions, and hidden truths that the essence of this whole story lies. A story that makes us reflect on the extent to which we are really in control of our decisions and to what extent nature can surprise us in a way we never imagined. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because often the illusion of security we create by seeking refuge in something seemingly simple can deceive us in ways we can't even imagine. The hut, made of aged wood, looked like a cozy shade in the middle of the desert. Its cracked pillars and weather-worn planks gave the impression that there, at least for an instant, the danger had been left behind. It was a place that, at first glance, conveyed the feeling of rest, of a pause in the desperate race that this man was waging against his own luck. The hope that the shelter could offer protection, even if temporary, was part of a survival strategy that in his head seemed logical. After all, who has never believed that a little shade or an antique ceiling could be enough to escape the heat or the chase? But what he didn't know at the time was that behind that semblance of security lurked an even greater danger. The wooden structure, despite looking harmless, had been invaded by a small army of marimbondos, who quietly built a nest under the roof, taking advantage of the cracks and the accumulation of dust. These insects, often considered only a threat of painful bites, actually carry an attack force that can be devastating, especially for those who are vulnerable, tired, scared, or disoriented. The illusion of protection was shattered in an instant as he realized that the refuge that seemed safe was actually a hidden trap. Upon entering the hut, the feeling of relief was quick, almost instantaneous. It was as if, for a few moments, the mind allowed itself to believe that everything was under control, that the escape had worked out. But this false sense of security is a trap in itself. When the man stepped on the wooden floor, a subtle, barely perceptible sound alerted the marimbondos to his presence, and in that moment, the real revelation happened. The insects, which had been silent until then, began to move, reacting to body heat, vibration, and movement. Like an angry cloud, they invaded space, and the impact was immediate. Painful stings, one after another, cut the silence of the decaying structure. What appeared to be a safe hiding place turned into a deadly trap. The intensity of the stings, coupled with the surprise of such a quick and brutal attack, turned the environment into a scene of chaos. The man tried to retreat, desperate, trying to escape from those creatures who in their fury spared no effort to defend themselves. His skin, already marked by red and swollen stings, showed the vulnerability of someone who had underestimated the dangers hidden behind a facade of tranquility. The illusion that an abandoned hut could be a barrier against any threat shattered in front of him, revealing that even the most seemingly harmless places can hide the most dangerous. At this moment, the true essence of the mistake was revealed. The decision to seek shelter in that structure, seemingly forgotten by time, was a fatal mistake. A choice that at its core reflected an escape mentality that prioritized the short term without considering the hidden consequences. The feeling of momentary relief gave way to despair as he tried to shake off the stings and escape from that silent nightmare. The psychological and physical impact of that attack would be felt for much longer than he could have imagined, marking not only his skin, but also his perception of his own vulnerability in the face of the force of nature. As the pain and weariness accumulated, the hope that that shelter would be a salvation turned into a bitter reminder of an ill-considered choice. The story of that man, now fallen, covered in stings and without the strength to react, reinforces a hidden truth that we often ignore. The illusion of protection can be our greatest trap. And as the desert dust began to settle, the signs that the force of nature spares no one became even more evident. What would happen next would reveal definitively that sometimes the greatest lesson of the desert is to learn to recognize its unseen dangers before they find us by surprise. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject because it is precisely there that history takes a turn that no one could have predicted. The man, despairing of the sharp pain of the stings, tried to quickly move away from the structure, his rapid and frantic movements fueled by fear and pain. But in the rush, his body ended up instinctively leaning against the flimsy roof, a structure that, although it seemed sturdy at first glance, was actually an aged wooden trap, full of cracks and loose pieces. It was a natural, almost involuntary move, based on the hope of finding stability for an instant, but which ultimately unleashed the silent fury that had been dormant there for years. For what he did not know was that beneath that layer of tiles lay an ancient secret, a hidden truth that would only reveal itself at the most unexpected moment. A nest of marimbondos, built with patience and endurance over many years, remained hidden under the decayed wood. These insects, which normally avoid human contact, were at that moment vigilant, ready to defend their territory with a force that surprises those who have never been victims of their attack. And the movement, the simple act of leaning on the roof, was enough to awaken this dormant fury. Like a time bomb, the structure began to shake, and a cloud of marimbondos came out of their hiding place with frightening speed. The reaction was instantaneous and devastating. The first sting came as a stab to the already sensitive skin of man, and at the same time dozens of other insects rushed towards him, forming a kind of furious swarm. It was as if the environment itself was conspiring against him, turning a moment of weakness into a death trap. The noise of confusion, the deafening hum, and the sensation of needles piercing flesh mingled in a mixture of physical pain and psychological despair. His attempt to retreat, to get away from the precarious structure, turned into a race against time, but the impact had already been made. The strength of the marimbondos was not only in the quantity, but in the brutality of their defense. Each sting carried a clear message: you entered our home and now you will pay the price. The man's skin, which already showed red and swollen marks, was a battlefield where pain and panic mixed in a cruel combination. The fear of an even harsher reaction, coupled with the inability to escape quickly, made him feel increasingly vulnerable. His mind, once searching for a way out, was now consumed by a single priority: escape from that hell of stings before it was too late. At that moment, every second seemed like an eternity. The insects, tireless, continued their onslaught, while he tried to stagger away, his body marked by bites. His vision blurred with pain and confusion, and the feeling of helplessness intensified. The impact of this decision, to lean on the roof, to try to take refuge in the abandoned structure, turned out to be one of the biggest pitfalls of his journey. A decision that seemed obvious, to seek temporary protection, eventually triggered a chain of events that would change everything. The force of nature, silent and relentless, proved more powerful than any hope of escape by conventional means. As the chaos unfolded, a deeper understanding began to take hold. Often our own actions, motivated by fear or an attempt at control, can put us in situations of extreme risk. The impact of a seemingly simple decision, such as leaning on an old structure, can trigger consequences that make us question our own mindset. This story, which seemed to be only a frustrated escape, reveals something much bigger: the hidden truth that the environment around us is not just a passive scenario, but an active force which reacts, which challenges, and which often teaches us lessons that are difficult to forget. That man's journey, marked by a choice that seemed innocent at the time, now became a reflection on the limits of control and the strength of nature itself, which does not forgive the arrogance of those who think they can dominate it. And so, as the desert dust began to settle and silence seemed to envelop everything around, a new understanding began to emerge. Every move, every decision, carried a weight that went beyond the present moment. The impact of that morning in the desert revealed that often the greatest battle is not against external forces, but against our own illusions of security. One mistake, one vulnerability, one ill-thought-out choice can turn an escape into a definite trap. And that lesson, which echoes loudly on the quiet sands of Arizona, reveals that true transformation often springs from a recognition of our own limitations and a respect for the force that the environment and life can exert on us. Now, when thinking about this episode, it becomes clear that the impact of a decision, no matter how simple it may seem, carries a load of meanings that go far beyond the immediate moment. Every action, every reaction, reveals a facet of our own learning journey. The force of nature, the unpredictability of the environment, and our own choices intertwine in a dance that often ends with a shocking revelation. The hidden truth that sometimes the greatest danger lies in our own hands, in our own naivety to underestimate what is around us. And in this scenario, what happened that day in the Arizona desert becomes a living example of how our mentality can be our greatest ally or the greatest obstacle when it comes to facing the most difficult challenges. Within seconds, the silence that had engulfed the room was completely shattered by a high-pitched, terrifying hum. It was as if a living cloud had appeared out of nowhere, a mass of insects that moved with frightening speed, covering everything around. The marimbondos, awakened by the movement or heat of the human body, had become an implacable force, a veritable storm of stings that seemed to have no end. Their small but numerous bodies launched themselves in a coordinated manner, forming a furious swarm that moved towards the man, who, desperate, tried to flee, but no longer had enough time or strength. Their screams spread through the air, echoing inside the hut, and soon became a sound of despair that mixed with the deafening hum of insects. The feeling of being surrounded by such a frighteningly organized and aggressive force was an impact that definitively marked his perception of vulnerability. Each sting felt like a stab in the already sensitive skin, a sharp pain that spread quickly, aggravating the panic that already gripped his thoughts. He tried to run, desperately looking for a way out, but the swarm seemed to have become an entity of its own, a force that relentlessly pursued him. The fear of standing there, surrounded, with no chance of escape, increased every second. His movements were uncoordinated, hysteria and pain mixed in his head, while insects attacked him from all sides, as if they wanted to make him a definite victim. The scene became a real battle of survival, an unequal struggle against an invisible, but at the same time frighteningly present enemy. The strength of the swarm was not only in the quantity, but in the coordination of each attack, in its determination to protect its territory at any cost. The screams that escaped from the man's mouth turned into a mixture of pleading, anger, and pain, a visceral expression of those who realized that their time there had run out. With each stab, his body filled with red, swollen marks, visible signs of a battle that seemed lost before it even began. He tried to dodge, staggering, but what once seemed like a quick escape turned into a desperate race against fate itself. The buzzing sound increased as the insects approached, almost like a mass of energy that pushed him to the limit of endurance. His head was spinning, confused by the pain, the adrenaline fumes, and the fear that at any moment he might totally lose control. His mind, which had been searching for hope, was now filled with thoughts of helplessness, of how it had all begun with a simple attempt to hide. The psychological impact was as strong as the physical pain. Each sting seemed to etch a mark on his soul, a reminder that no matter how hard he tried to escape, the force of nature, when awakened, does not forgive. The heat of the sun, the dust of the desert, the screams of despair, and the incessant hum created an atmosphere of absolute chaos. At this moment, all he could do was fight against his own body, trying to get away from that hell of stings, while he felt his body fill with marks, his skin burn, his breathing get harder and harder. The feeling that everything was coming to an end became almost palpable. The insects, relentless, did not give rest, and the man, exhausted, with punctured skin and a pounding heart, realized that perhaps this was his last attempt to escape. Every movement to escape, every attempt to cry out for help, seemed futile in the face of this force that multiplied and coordinated itself in a frighteningly efficient way. There was no more time, nor enough strength to resist. That moment would forever mark his memory, a reminder of how the force of nature, when awakened, reveals its cruelest face, a face that turns a simple escape into a battle of life and death, a battle he no longer had a chance to win. He left the hut behind, each step becoming a struggle against his own exhausted body and against what seemed like an invisible force pushing him in the opposite direction. The desert, with its silent immensity and its warm sand, seemed almost like an entity that observed everything, as if waiting for the right moment to exercise its natural justice. The man, now completely overcome by pain, fear, and fatigue, tried to keep the hope that with some effort he could escape from that hell of stings. But in fact, he knew it was an illusion. The marimbondos, aroused and enraged, were not just attacking by chance. They followed an ancestral instinct, a force that knew no bounds or mercy. Every move he made seemed only to reinforce his vulnerability. His steps, once hesitant, were now desperate, almost incoherent, as if the environment itself wanted to show his true face. The persecution was not just physical, it was a demonstration of the enormous force of nature, which, at its core, is impartial, just, and ruthless. Just as human justice, which is often slow, complex, full of nuances, the justice of the earth, of the universe, does not wait for explanations or for mercy. It happens at the right time, unquestionably, and there is no escape. When he started running, the insects realized his intention and reacted with frightening speed. The buzzing became a soundtrack of despair, a reminder that in that instant, his helplessness was total. That scenario, which from afar seemed like an attempt to escape, turned out to be a cruel demonstration of how the force of nature is capable of imposing limits that, no matter how hard we try to ignore them, are always there. That man, who once believed that his cunning and his determination could guarantee him some advantage, now found himself completely at the mercy of a natural cycle that knows no mercy. The marimbondos, moving in coordinated groups, seemed almost to have their own intelligence, a collective force that acts in unison to defend their space. Every sting was proof that human endurance has limits that are often only revealed in the most difficult hour. Nature's pursuit reveals something fundamental to our journey, the illusion of control. No matter how hard we try to plan, no matter how much we believe that we can overcome obstacles with willpower or strategy, there are forces that we simply cannot tame. Nature, with her brute strength, her endurance, and her impersonality, shows that no matter how strong a human being is, she is greater, wiser, and more ruthless. This story, which could seem like a simple, frustrated escape, is actually a powerful metaphor for how life often puts us in front of limits that we cannot overcome. And when these limits appear, all we have to do is accept the hidden truth, that everything in life has a justice of its own, a law that works without explanation, a cycle of action and reaction that inevitably brings us back to the starting point, often with a lesson that is difficult to forget. As the man desperately tried to escape, each step slower, his thoughts were mixed with pain, fatigue, and a growing sense of powerlessness. The strength of the chase was not only in the speed or quantity of insects, but in its very essence of showing that in the face of an implacable adversary, our human strategies can become completely useless. What seemed like a simple escape turned into a clear demonstration that the justice of nature knows no mercy, does not accept shortcuts or subterfuge. It just happens, inevitable, and anyone who tries to challenge this cycle ends up discovering, on the skin, that the greatest strength in the universe is exactly that, your ability to do whatever it takes to maintain balance. And so, as the desert sun shone brightly, mercilessly, and the hum of the marimbondos intensified, the hidden truth revealed itself with all its might. The impact of this desperate race, this struggle against one's own limitations, reinforced a lesson few want to admit. Natural justice is ruthless, and no one escapes it for long. Every step of that man, every effort to free himself seemed to become more and more useless in the face of a force that knows no bounds. Behind the scenes of this story, which unfolded under the scorching Arizona sun, revealed that in the great dynamics of life, the only certainty is that everything returns to its natural rhythm at the right time, with the strength of a hidden truth that few can understand while they are still halfway there. Following the trails of sand and dust left by the fugitive, the patrolman advanced cautiously, attentive to any sign of movement or sound that might indicate his presence in the vicinity. Desert pursuit requires a combination of patience and precision, because every footprint, every mark in the sand, can be the difference between a quick catch or a fruitless search that drags on for hours. The agents had the experience of those who know the vastness well, and they knew that in those extreme conditions, every detail was crucial. With each step, the silence of the environment was broken only by the sound of their boots on the sand as they carefully looked around, looking for any sign that the man was there, weak, tired, or somehow vulnerable. And it was exactly this vulnerability that they found. When they reached the place where the footprints became most evident, they realized that the scenery had changed dramatically. On the ground lay a fallen man, lying on his side, covered with stings, his face marked with a mixture of pain and relief, as if begging for help. His eyes showed the extreme fatigue, the physical pain, and the defeat that completely dominated him. The scene was as if all his hope had been exhausted right there, in the face of a force that he could no longer resist. The patrolman realized in that instant that what looked like a hideout had become its own doom. The image of the man there, vulnerable, covered in bites, reinforced the idea that, in life many times, what we seek to protect us ends up betraying us in ways that we do not even imagine. An attempt to hide from something bigger, stronger, turned into a death trap, a lesson that the environment itself with its brute force taught that day. The capture was inevitable, as if fate had been written on the footprints left in the sand. The patrolman approached carefully, knowing that despite the physical defeat, the man's story carried a lesson that went far beyond simple, thwarted escape. It was a clear demonstration that the impact of a decision, no matter how impulsive or desperate, often puts us exactly at the point of greatest vulnerability. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with a mixture of relief and reflection. The scene, which could seem cruel from so hard, actually showed the reality of a journey where the force of nature and human decisions meet at an inflection point. What seemed like a survival strategy, finding a hiding place, trusting in the hope that the environment would give him a chance to escape, eventually became his conviction sentence. And even with pain and fatigue dominating his body, the man knew deep down that his struggle had come to an end. The capture, although inevitable, brought with it a series of internal questions, reflections that remain after the episode. How can a poorly thought-out decision, a misplaced hope, turn into its own trap? How can the force of nature, which is often seen as something beautiful and tranquil, prove ruthless and unbeatable when awakened? These questions echo as a hidden truth that few want to accept, but that everyone in some way needs to understand. Because that man's journey, marked by desperate flight and inevitable defeat, reveals that the deepest transformation happens just at the moment when we recognize our limits. And so, as the patrolman helped lift the man up, the scene seals with a quiet realization that in life often what seems like a quick escape or an attempt to hide, in fact, is a bridge to a lesson that will be marked in the memory of those who followed that whole story. The impact of your decision, the weight of the environment, and the strength that nature itself possesses, all this reveals that no matter how hard we try to escape or hide, there are greater forces that are always lurking, ready to turn our actions into inevitable lessons, which can only be learned on the skin. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because that man's story is not just about a thwarted escape or an insect bite, but about a lesson that runs through our own life journey. We often believe that escape, the attempt to hide from problems or obstacles, is a smart way out, a strategy that will save us. But the hidden truth, which only reveals itself in the most difficult hour, is that our decisions carry an impact that we cannot always foresee. And most of the time, this impact is related to our own mindset, the way we face challenges, and the choices we make in the heat of emotion. The Arizona desert episode shows us that true transformation happens when we learn to recognize our limits, to understand that the force of nature, as well as the force of the universe, is not something we can challenge without consequence. If you think about it, everything in your life works as one big narrative, where every decision is a piece that influences the end result. Sometimes we believe that a quick attitude, a momentary escape, can save us from a difficult situation, but the story of the fugitive reveals that often this same attitude can turn into a devastating impact, a trap that only increases our vulnerability. The mentality that we can escape from everything, without considering the weight of our actions, is an illusion that many carry, and that only comes undone when the universe forces us to face our own fragility. In this sense, the impact of a decision, no matter how small it may seem, can trigger a sequence of events that completely change the course of our history, often irreversibly. And that's where our deeper understanding of the behind the scenes of these situations comes in. Life, like nature, has its own rules of justice, which are often not evident at the time of impact, but are revealed in full force in the consequence. What happened that day in the desert is a strong reminder that no matter how hard we try to control everything, there are external and internal forces that act unpredictably, and that this force, for the most part, works as an instrument of justice. Perhaps this is why many transformation stories involve moments when the illusion of control is overthrown, and the person comes to understand that true strength lies in accepting their own limitations. Reflecting on this leads us to understand that life is made of choices, and that each of them, no matter how small it may seem, carries a hidden truth. Often the impact of a poorly thought-out decision or a misplaced hope reveals itself precisely at the time when we least expect it, leaving marks that go beyond the physical. What happened to that man is a potent metaphor that the vulnerability we carry is often the result of a mindset that underestimates the power of the environment or the natural force that governs everything around us. This story shows us that our greatest strength lies in the humility to recognize limits, the courage to accept what we cannot change, and the wisdom to learn from mistakes. If we think about it, this lesson applies to all of us. No matter how strong we feel or how much we believe we can overcome any challenge, there are limits that only reveal themselves at the time of impact. And often this impact is harder to bear than we realize, because it comes with a hidden truth, that we are part of a larger cycle of forces that we do not control, and that by trying to underestimate them, we end up exposing ourselves to unnecessary risks. The force of nature, as well as the force of life, requires respect, humility, and a deep understanding that the impact of our decisions can put us exactly in front of what we least want to face. So reflecting on this story is more than a simple survival narrative. It is an invitation to look within, to understand how our own actions shape what we call destiny, how our choices create the backstage of true transformation. And in doing so, we realize that the most important impact we can make is the one that comes from a mature mindset, a conscious acceptance of our limits and a posture that values humility. Because in the end, the biggest lesson that remains is that life, with all its force and unpredictability, is a great school of transformation, an opportunity to learn that true justice lies in recognizing what we can and cannot control. He said, "That makes sense to me." If you made it this far, it's because this story really touched on some important point for you. Perhaps it made you think about your own decisions, the limits that we sometimes ignore, or the force that nature and life have to put us in the place of humility. These reflections are valuable because they help us to see beyond the immediate moment and to realize that often the greatest learning comes precisely from the impacts that we cannot control. If this content made sense to you, here is the invitation to subscribe to the channel. Thus you follow stories that, like this one, bring an important reflection, and that can help you think in a more conscious way about what we face in the routine. Also, leave a comment saying that "I'm with you until the end," or any other phrase that shows that you identified with this message. This helps to create a stronger connection and make the content even closer to those who follow. And of course, give a like in a natural way, because it shows that what was shared here made sense to you. Your participation is what makes all this happen in a lighter and truer way. There is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there, so we can move forward together, exploring stories, lessons, and reflections that help us better understand what is happening around us.